Okay, what we're going to do in this scene is an experiment with primarily alcohol inks. That's the experimental part. I'm going to utilize some rubbing alcohol to try to add in some different types of textures within this stamp scene. I am going to be stamping everything out in dye-based inks as far as the imagery goes, though. So what we'll do on this 8.5 by 11 piece of glossy cardstock is we'll get kind of a foundation going with a celestial sky-based background. Okay, and I'm going to use a couple different clouds here. Okay, they're the same image, but they're just in different sizes because I want to work scale and distance into the scene a little bit more. With two different sizes, you can always use one size, no problem. It just kind of gives a little bit more depth within the foreground, what will end up being the foreground. And what I'm thinking about is just kind of building up these forms like this, and there'll be an opening for things like stars and such. Okay. I want to keep things a little more irregular if I can. I'm like anyone else. I tend to kind of fall back into pattern at times. I think my pad here is starting to disintegrate. It's time for a new, well, what Mari sells is blank pads now. But it's time. I think this one's had it. It's probably 20 years old at this point in time. Alright, so these clouds, you just overlap and change the angle slightly. I'm really, there's a lot of surface area on these stamps here, so you really have to try to apply, you know, a good amount of pressure, but mostly even pressure over the entire thing. If you just kind of stamp it like this, with your hands out here on the edges, you know, be it whatever you're using, platform, acrylic blocks, whatever, just go, you know, top, bottom, left, right, and of course middle. Okay, I stand up when I'm doing these big, you know, roughly 3 by 4.5 inch stamps. Okay, now these are not, a lot of times what I do is I kind of wipe off the edges before I stamp out sky figures. On this one, I'm going to really have a lot of this area filled in, so I'm not even worried about that. Okay, see that? I mean, it becomes, you know, fairly seamless. And I'm overlapping, I don't know, it's probably about a 1/2 inch or so with these, you know, fairly large clouds like this. Alright, let's see, which way do we want to go? By changing the angle too, I don't go 90 degrees or something like that. It's more of like a 15 to 60 or something like that. In other words, don't go stamp it like this and then stamp it exactly like that. It looks a little bit too kind of squared off. Got a little piece of hair right there. Any little tiny bit of dust or something like that can affect your impression, because as small as it is raised in that area. Okay. Alright, so we have this opening. Now I'll refine this opening in here. It's a little bit too straight too. I want to get it a little bit twisted or something like that, maybe like an S or something of that sort. So I tell you what, let's go up. I have to kind of figure it out. I'll go up this way, like that. Okay, this is the smaller one, by the way. And same thing applies. You just kind of get your impressions going like that. Okay, and then your next one, you're going to overlap that one and overlap your other one. Okay, and just go like that. Now see, these I'm stamping this way, And when I'm stamping these ones up here, I'm going upside down, so they'll be kind of, I don't know, center lit if it's like this. If this is up and down, then they'll be bottom lit, and these ones will be top lit. So the stars, what I'm going for is it'll look like the stars are kind of doing the illumination. They're the sources of light illuminating these clouds. Okay, let's go about like so. I'll just stamp right over that little piece that didn't stamp out, and it fills right in. Yeah, it's no problem. Okay, and go like that. See how I kind of turned that upside down? Or I did turn it upside down, not kind of. And then I'll come over here and go like that. It's like this little opening right here, this trench. Anyways, when you do kind of this little S-curve, it's kind of a natural, I don't know, there's a natural gesture to it, that's the word I'm looking for. So it kind of gives the piece an inherent kind of foundational harmony, or grace, I should say. Not really harmony, but grace to it. Alright, that pad worked much better than this one. This one's... I hate to throw those pads away since they're not making those anymore, but what am I going to do with it? Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll keep the lid or something. Doubt if I'll ever need it, but... Okay, so that was in a, I don't know, a fairly dark blue. It's like a navy blue or something. So let's pick out some sky images, okay? Deep space, celestial, whatever, stars, alright? There's a Milky Way, this one's the star cluster. No, this one's the star cluster, this one's star birth, sorry. And I'll just position these right in the middle here. You could go in and mask off some of those clouds. I'm not really going to bother with that because I'm going to be doing a lot of additional tones in this piece. So I'm not really worried about that, and I'm just, I don't know, I'm working through this composition to get to kind of my main purpose, which is experimenting around with those alcohol inks and doing this kind of subtractive process along the way. But anyways, it just fills in like that. That's what these designs are designed to do. They're designed to be overlapped, the angles changed, and to blend in as seamlessly as possible. A lot of people think that this is kind of the artistry of doing this, and it's so hard, but I mean, it's really, it might be kind of hard in terms of the concept because everyone's so used to doing really careful placement, masking, positioning, using stamp positioners and whatnot. For me, I just overlap it, okay? So where this is going to overlap into this one, it's probably like right up to here, okay? And in here, it's probably overlapping down here. So I've drawn, if I've done my design job correctly in the designing itself, I've already drawn in and weighted my transitions enough to where you aren't going to have to do a lot of tedium in terms of placement, compositional considerations in regards to the blending of imagery. You just overlap it. Okay, so see this one right here? This has this little space that's remaining right there. And I'll just come right there. I could have used more than one stamp. I thought, yeah, this one has these kind of, these larger stars, and that's kind of what I want to work around some of those larger things with some alcohol inks in my little experiment here. Alright, so we're just all monochromatic here. Sometimes I color that Starbirth image just so it has some inherent transitions of color within the impression itself. But I'm going to be running in a lot of color in here anyway. Alright, so this looks really quite textured, to say the least. And it's mono, there's a there's a somewhat of a uniform value to it over the entire thing, and that's what we're going to change here in this initial toning process, okay? So, just in general, my stars are going to be my sources of light in here, okay? So if those are going to be my sources of light, what I want to do is I want to tone the areas around them and make them darker, okay? And if I make those areas around those stars darker, then the stars themselves will stand out more by contrast. Does that make sense? So if it's a sun or a moon or anything like that that you want to remain light, or to look like it's the light source or an object reflecting that light, then it just simply means don't tone it out, right? If you cover everything up in darkness, there's not going to be light there. But we do want darkness to define our light. All right, so that being said, we have a lot of area to cover here. Let's see what we have here. I have a lot of dye-based ink reinkers here. This one's a Memento Summer Sky. It's a fairly light blue, or it's a really light blue. Memento pad. Let's go with the Distress Ink Tumbled Glass. Okay, these types of inks are very familiar to a lot of people, right? So let's go with some of those. But instead of just dipping my stylus tool or sponge applicator, whatever you're using, you can use something like this too to apply your inks. You can use a wadded up paper towel. You can use a cotton ball, maybe. I haven't used the cotton ball yet. Maybe I should experiment around with that. But whatever you're using, okay, this just makes it a little bit faster when you can take a big dollop of ink like this. Now you have to be careful because there's a lot of ink in here now. Okay, maybe I'll squeeze some of it out. Actually, it's not really coming out very well. Ah, there, okay, there it comes. All right. Looks like it might have a little pigment ink in there or something too. But this, it's like a brush now, you load it up with paint. When you're kind of dipping into a pad, you know, you can do that, but it just takes a little bit longer. All right, so as I'm going on here, I'm just going with a light touch. Don't squeeze and scrub with these things. I'm just barely touching it. It's like I can hold it like this, okay, where it's just wobbly, and I'm applying it like that. That would not be an incorrect amount of pressure. Now that's not really comfortable for me to work with, but that's kind of the idea. All right, so notice your stars in here. Okay, now remember I said my clouds are going to be reflecting some of that light. So the clouds next to my sky and stars, I'm going to try to leave those fairly light. But I do want to represent some light in here. So in the designs themselves, you can see it right here, there's the darker cloud, right? Darker portion of the cloud, and you can see it throughout here. Dark, 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 right? Let's go into these areas and to reiterate that darkness, okay? So it doesn't have to be some kind of theoretical thing. You don't think, well, what should be dark? It already is dark, so you just fill in there and just follow suit, okay? Where's the dark area on these ones? The larger ones, right there and right there. You're just filling in, okay? Those areas, you're reiterating it with some really light shadows right now, okay? Okay, let's come in here, see my stars right here. Now here's the beauty of re-inkers too. Now if you don't have a re-inker, you can still do this, okay? But see, I haven't re-inked yet, and I've really gotten quite a bit of coverage with just that one inking of my tip here. My foam tip. Okay. Now it's getting a little bit drier on my tip, you know, because I've applied a lot of that ink. So I do find myself pressing down a little bit harder, but still, do not start scrubbing with your tip here, because these foam tips, while not fragile at all, a lot of my tips I think are at least 15 years old. Some of them are getting a little bit dry and then I have to replace them, but we're talking years and years of use, so it's not like, you know, my tips have, you know, barely been used, but they're 15 years old. No, this is 15 years of heavy use. I have over 500 videos posted. The naming convention, you know, some of them are like in 25 parts, so it, you know, like video 30 whatever, you know, that might have 25 ABCs to it or something like that. That's the mood and media one, but there's 500 videos and a lot of them are using these tips here, and I hardly ever have to replace a tip. Alright, so don't scrub with them. I'm saying that I want everyone's, you know, purchases, you know, to be, you know, purchases of value when it comes to media, stamps, and whatever, in terms of use. So just take care of your tools, and they'll really take care of you. All right, can you see what's going on here? We have these areas of reflected light, meaning the clouds. The clouds aren't the light source in here, or are supposed to represent it, but you can see my stars in here are starting to stand out a little bit more. Not a lot, you know, because I mean, this is just a light blue that we're going with right now. But you can see that lighting here on the clouds, right? And where is it darker? It's darker in the darker areas, okay? Now, if I stamped this all out and I was doing this in pastels, it's the same concept, okay? You hit it in those shadows with some light blue pastels and darker pastels. You can run your lighter ones on top of the lighter areas, so you darken the shadows and you highlight the lights, okay? And I'll show you what, what I mean by that when we get to that highlighting portion. But all right, now what was this? Oh, this was tumbled glass. So a little bit of a different blue. Where do you apply it? You apply it in the same areas, okay, that we did with the summer sky. And you're saying, why? Well, these inks are transparent, so the more kind of tones that you lay down over one another, the deeper and richer the end result can be. Not all. I mean, some might not have any effect at all, but this one right here, I don't know if you can see it, it's a little bit of a warmer blue over here than on this side. So it just looks a little bit deeper and richer, because the tumbled glass is a different hue than that summer sky. Summer sky is a little bit more neutral. Tumbled glass, to me, has a slight warmth to it. Okay, it's not green or anything like that. It's just kind of going in that direction as far as a temperature goes of that given ink color. All right, so that is being applied roughly about like so, and that looks good to me. I think that's all I'll do. Alright, so let's go along. I bought this one right here. This is Mermaid Lagoon. Let's give that one a try. Let's see how much I put down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go with about 4 drops of it. I didn't even really squeeze that. I just kind of tapped it. Just use the same applicator, so it's a combination. That Mermaid Lagoon is a combination of the Mermaid Lagoon and those other colors that came before it, because there's some of those colors that are still in it, which makes a nice transitional tone, you know, because you have some kind of combination between the previous ink and this current ink that you're on. Test it out. See, it is quite a bit darker. It's more in a medium blue tone. Alright, now here's where you're going to be fairly careful, because it's darker to begin with. If you cover up something that's supposed to remain light, you know, that's kind of it. You can go dark next to it if you've made something too light, and it'll seem lighter by contrast, but you can't really remove this ink off of there. That's set with a little bit of an asterisk, because this paper is getting fairly wet in consistency because of all that ink that I've laid down. So sometimes you go over it like that, you know, you can kind of wipe that ink off a little bit, but it is, dye-based inks apply to the surface of your, whatever surface you're using, paper or whatever, and the way they color is to stain, okay? But if they're floating on top of another kind of wet layer of ink, they haven't soaked in to stain yet. Okay. But hopefully you can see kind of the transitions that are happening in here. It's happening slowly because I'm not working from a really super light blue to a really dark one in one fell swoop. Okay, I'm kind of building up into those darker tones gradually. Can you see that now? It's starting to kind of reveal itself a little bit more. I'm thinking down here, maybe I shouldn't have been so light down there. Maybe I'll add a little bit of another tone over those ones. Maybe I'll reserve that one for my Caribbean blue. The Caribbean blue is really a beautiful warm blue, and we'll keep more of the highlights closer to my light sources. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Or maybe these lighter areas I can go over with the alcohol inks and play around with that. Alright, so we have a nice little foundation right here. I'm not really quite sure which way I will configure it later. Yeah, I want to go a little bit, let's put a little bit of tone over some of these clouds. It's a little bit too light. I want more emphasis on the stars in here, so let's tone some of these clouds out a touch. Okay, but they can still be lighter in some areas, okay, and darker in the darks, but I want to bring that lighting emphasis to the center. Okay, so I'm just kind of going right over these ones again with the light touch. Okay, if you want to go darker, it doesn't mean you have to scrub more, something like that. Just keep it nice and light, and then it'll also save your hands and everything like that. Don't develop arthritis, you know, not necessarily doing this, but any type of project, you know, crafting style of methodology where you're utilizing repetitive strokes. Okay, this one is Blueprint Sketch. This one's really dark. This is almost like my Prussian blue in the Marvy. Let's just go with a little bit of this one. So the darker you go, kind of a little bit less control you have over it, so maybe just use less ink on here. When I apply this down, I know it's going to be really quite dark, so I'll just start applying it in a little... okay, actually that wasn't too bad. I had a lot of the previous ink in here, but when I just go straight Blueprint Sketch onto an applicator with nothing else in there, it is really dark. Which I want, because I want that contrast, but I also want a lot of control over it. Okay, you see how dark it's getting right there? Now that's not nearly as dark as the pure form of that Blueprint Sketch, though. So this is perfect. It's the perfect saturation of it right now, the perfect value, because it's, you know, it's more of a mix of a few different colors, a few different blues. I'll work the perimeter with this one a lot. I want to contain my composition through the use of value, making the edges just darker, okay? But I don't just have it dark right here and then it goes to light. I want that transition, okay? So every time I'm doing this, I'm kind of wiping it from the outside in. And how that works is it goes wet on the outside and drier on the inside, kind of. It could just be that I've applied more ink on the corners, okay? So you get that transition. Okay, let's make some of these stars stand out a little bit more by bringing some tone that's darker a little bit closer to them. All right. Getting there. It's a pretty big piece of paper, so this isn't too bad as far as, you know, the amount of coverage we've achieved here. Let me see. Should I go with some more blueprint sketch? Let's see what other colors I have. Paris Dusk. What is that? I know that's a memento, but I'm not really quite sure what that looks like. Dusty Concord. Looks like purple. Let me try the Paris Dusk here. It looks pretty dark. I don't know. I didn't think it was darker than the blueprint sketch, but I don't know. That is. That's really quite dark. Oh, the memento re-inkers. If you apply them kind of really thick like this, they start to separate, and I see these little kind of bubbles appearing. It's really not bubbles. It's just these little kind of pooling things that kind of separate. I mean, I wouldn't do that if I was putting that on my pad and stamping something out in that color. But when you apply the inks like this, I like that kind of texture. It's kind of like a volunteer texture. It's not something that I intend, you know, to achieve when applying it, but it's there. So I'm someone that likes texture. I don't need things like applied perfectly smooth. If I want something really smooth, then that's fine, but a lot of times I want some texture around it so that they contrast against each other, and the smooth portion looks really smooth next to something really textural. So you can play those things, those two qualities against one another. All right, that's a pretty nice color there. Let's go with a little bit more of that. I just got a lot of these re-inkers, I don't know, relatively recently, so for me, I don't remember what I have sometime. And I don't have a lot of the pads for these colors. I figured if I'm not doing a lot of these colors of ink, I'm never going to stamp something out in that color. And I'm just using it to apply, to color my scene. So I just went with the re-inker, because you get a lot more ink than in the pad form. And like in a situation like this, it just goes on so much faster too. So. Anyways, can you see those stars starting to stand out a little bit more? The darker I take the area around them, by contrast, the lighter things, or the things that remain light, are proportionately lighter in appearance by contrast. Does that make sense? So you make this one step darker, that area right there that I leave light seems one step lighter. Okay. I'm going a little bit farther with this ink, this color, or the type of ink, sorry, than I thought I would. I was going to go more with the alcohol ink, so I'll still do that on here, but let's try this one right here. That's Concord, Dusty Concord. I was going to say Concord Grape. It's Dusty Concord, so maybe it's more of a kind of an aged looking Concord, purplish tinge. So, all right, so that being said, we're going to kind of influence this, I think. Well, okay, I thought I was going to influence that a little bit more, taking it into kind of a violet color scheme. That's not so much. It just looks darker to me. There is a tinge of violet in there. Okay, so if I put it over kind of more white, it does look a little bit more violet. I thought it would look a little bit more so. I know I have that other ink in here still, yes, but I don't know, I thought it'd be more purple tinged. Yeah, not too bad. Or not too much. I usually don't use that kind of touch, you know, where I'm kind of moving it around, but the surface is fairly moist. So, all right, I'm getting a little bit too close to some of those stars. I don't want that. All right. That looks pretty good in terms of my lighting. All right. Out here, I want to go a little bit darker, and that's what I'm contemplating right now. I'm contemplating whether or not I want to stamp my imagery a little bit darker right now before I get into some other touches. And what's coming to mind, I don't know, I'll just go off my first instinct. I'm thinking I'll do it right now. All right, so let's bring in some darker clouds down here and on the perimeter. It's because this area down here is darker than the color of ink that I stamped those clouds in, okay? So while I can see them, I can't see them very well. All right, it's very, very subtle. So this is what I always do. I just go back to, let's just go with the smaller one right here. It's a little bit more dense, and let's utilize this in here. And let's do it in black. Okay? This is what I'm going to do too. I'll take a dry paper towel, and I will do that thing where I kind of blot off the edges, because this is just such a dark color to do this one. Okay, and I'm not going to have it filled in everywhere, so it'll kind of be more perimeter oriented. So I do kind of wipe off the edges a little bit like that. Just a little bit more depth right here. I'll hold this up so you can see it after I get these down. You can always go back and restamp more imagery, especially when it comes to things like skies, where there's not really any rules. Clouds, you know, they're built up and deep. You know, it's not just kind of real surface oriented. They're made out of moisture, so you should be able to see somewhat through them in some ways. They're a little bit more translucent. So you get that right there. So see that extra kind of aspect of depth. We'll need to fill in a little bit more around that, but we're building out this space in here, and we want it to look deep and deep, I don't know, just to convey that feeling of kind of this infinite amount of space. Or at least, I don't know if it's infinite, it's just several, maybe light years or something like that from these clouds right here, you know, to the most distant of stars, okay? All right, so anyways, there it is on the top. I don't know, what those are supposed to represent are things that are closer to us. Usually things that are a little bit darker, closer to the eye. Things that are lighter in the distance. And of course those represent stars, so we know that those are, you know, really far away. You know, maybe some of those stars, you know, you're seeing them by the time the light reaches us. What is it? It's like thousands. I don't know if it's millions of years old. I forgot. But quite old. Doesn't that look kind of deeper down there now as a result? All right, let's see what we have here now. Okay, now I have gone in with a much darker color, black, than that other blue, even though that blue is pretty dark tone. What I'm going to do, I'll just take off most of the ink that I was off the applicator that I was using, and we'll use the same one for my black now. Now, I usually don't use ink or black and fill in like that. It's too dark. I don't want that amount, okay? Maybe if I was doing a gigantic 11 by 17, or, you know, if I had a huge amount of space I wanted really dark black, then maybe I would do that, but yeah, I don't know, even something like that. Okay, so I'm going in and I'm reiterating this outside edged application with black. And I'm being careful. I'm transitioning. I'm not doing the top portion of them, or whatever they are. I don't know if that's the top or the bottom. Depends on which way I configure my page when I'm done. Okay. All right, a little bit more space. I'm talking about distance-wise now. All right, so let's see what we can do on this. All right, now, one of the things to me, I do like the variation that's happening in here. In terms of the values of blue, okay, there's some light blues, some darker blues, there's kind of more of that violet tinge in there. But I also want to go in and bring in a little sense of warmth, I think, into the piece. And one of the inks that I've been using quite a lot lately is this Caribbean blue. All right, let me see here. This is just how I clean my stylus tools out. I just put a little water on a paper towel. When I'm just doing one, if I'm doing a big batch of them, I take them all over to the sink and I rinse them out and wash them out pretty good. But okay, Caribbean blue. All right, let me get some of the moisture out of that too. I think I need a re-inker for my Caribbean blue. I don't think I have one. Or no, maybe I do. Can't remember. Okay, so let's. Yeah, it's a really bright blue. Look at that glow that it achieves right there. Okay. It's really similar in value to a couple of those other blues that I added down there, but there's a warmth to this one. I mean, this one definitely has, you know, that tinge of green, you know, yellow green. It's kind of moving into that warm turquoisey type of color. I'll take some of these into my areas around my stars a little bit. I've almost gone too much in here, too crazy with this. I should have held back a little bit, you know, to leave more room for that, for my alcohol inks to, you know, to do their thing. But I don't know. I really like the way that this one was going, so I just went crazy with it. That's a problem on these experiments and these videos that I do in this kind of spirit where I'm just testing things out. I kind of let things go in the direction that it seems to want to go in, even if it kind of goes against my initial concept. The initial concepts are not really super thought out or anything. It's just a, I don't know, kind of an idea, theory, whatever. All right. Okay, so that is the Caribbean blue. That made a pretty big difference, didn't it? So I don't know. You can, if you don't have Caribbean blue, a lot of people don't. It's just kind of a, you know, like a light turquoise or something like that. You can kind of play around with whatever color schemes you have, but a little bit more of a glow. It's kind of moving into that green, and when you go and place analogous colors next to each other, analogous colors are colors right next to each other on a color wheel, you know, orange and yellow, orange and red, red and violet, whatever, blue and green, right? When you place them next to each other, in this case kind of overlapping, it creates a color glow. So that's kind of the idea here, is to make it look like light is coming from within this scene. So that's why we made things darker, so it makes other things lighter by contrast, but also we can get that color glow going by just twisting your color scheme a little bit going into that next color. Okay, so without further ado, let's play around with some colors out of my alcohol ink pens. Now, these are alcohol inks, so some of this might be a little bit moist, I'm not sure. I'm trying to see. My fingertips are already a little bit inky, so I can't tell if some ink is coming off of some of those wettest areas. Maybe. Okay, but just in general, these shouldn't be blending with the water-based inks, because these are alcohol-based, and those two don't mix. Okay, so I'm just going to start applying this in some of these areas. It's not really going to show up a lot, you know, unless I go fairly dark. Okay, now see where I'm applying a lot of this color. What is this? Melon. Okay, that's something that you could have done too if you didn't have that Caribbean blue. You just ink it up right, you know, right all over your scene. Okay. This is an instance where I can get really close to my stars without going into them too, because this is a much more kind of a, in terms of the tip, a controlled application of a given color. Now I'm just going with a fairly light color too right now. It's not influencing the surface a lot, but it is kind of coating them. And I'm getting right up to my little star area. Okay, so and that's the general procedure that I'll be following here. I'll just kind of be working some light tones into my darker tones, okay? See these areas, this is kind of those fine-tuning types of things where we can see these little billows right here, right? Okay. Well, just like I did with my database inks, I can really fine-tune it. I can get in these shadows like this, okay? Now, one of the things that I'm going to be doing with those Q-tips and alcohol, rubbing alcohol, is I'll be going into the scene and using that as like a blender tool. So I'm not worried about a really smooth gradated application when it comes to these inks right here, because I'm going to blend them later on when I get to that. Okay, so it might look a little bit rough here, to begin with, or just, at the start. But that's the whole kind of experiment here. Now, when I go into it with the alcohol too, it's not going to be removing or blending out the dye-based inks that are already down there. It'll just be blending in what I've applied with the pens. What's nice about both inks too is that they're transparent, so you can really build up your depth with them, because the colors underneath will show through whatever layers are on top. Yeah, a little bit less when you get to black, but even that, you get a richer looking black over the top of other colors than just using black alone on white. Okay, now remember, if you go on with like a light blue or something like that, it's not going to make a certain area down there look lighter. Again, it's transparent colors that we're going with, not opaque. Okay, so this one's cyan blue, a little bit darker, right? So maybe this one will show up a little bit more. Not too much, okay. It's just a little bit darker than that. The colors underneath. I feel like I'm cleaning glass or something like that. It's a difference between a brush marker, I guess, and those little tip ones. It's really squeaky. Alright, let's try this one right here. Spearmint. Let's try to look into a different color. Okay, so this is moving into that warm temperature. Okay, see that right there? See how it's really glowing? Things are blending in so well, it's almost like we don't even need to really go into it too much, if at all, with the alcohol, rubbing alcohol. I will, but it's not too bad as is. It's not great, but we'll blend this out a little bit more. fairly interesting from a textural standpoint. Looking great? Maybe not. But that's where, hopefully, kind of all that blending will come into play. I want to go for some interesting textures, and I want to see some things that I haven't seen before, kind of on this kind of experimental kind of a kick or whatever. Alright, this is going with this dark. This is where it really doesn't look good, okay? But I want to lay some of this ink down, because I want to have something to kind of blend out into hopefully some interesting textures. Like that. Here's a French blue. That one was cobalt blue. Okay. Yeah, this one's about the same. There's not very much difference here. Let's go a little bit more bold, okay? Apple green. I just ordered some of that for our school art program in paper form. My idea is to have these kind of transitions of color kind of emanating from my light sources. Boy, that sure looks terrible. But it always does like that. Kind of in that stage before you blend out the those colors. Okay, I'm looking to see if I have any other brighter greens, and I don't in alcohol form. I'm wondering about possibly some other colors. I think that looks okay though, like that. All right, so let's see what we can do here with that, if anything. All right, I just have some rubbing alcohol that I put in a water bottle here. I want to bring all that alcohol down. I'm going to just put it right here in this little palette. All right. All right, I haven't done anything like this in probably 25 years. I don't know, maybe it's been more. Rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip, right? These are alcohol pens, so it should affect it somewhat, for the better or for the worse, I don't know. Okay, so let's go in here and let's just kind of go into it a little bit like this. Okay, I'm just kind of, it's like a barista kind of going into these and kind of moving this around a little bit. That foam. Alright. Okay, here. Oh, yeah. I remember I kind of used to dab too, and it would start separating those little ink applications here a little bit. Let's see if you... Yeah, can you see that? Now that's what I'm going for. Now whether or not, I might not have added enough alcohol. You might need a little bit more in there. Now I don't want that like hard ring or something like that. So remember, you can apply and remove and apply and remove. So we can go in here and add more too, after you kind of allow this to dry. So you can kind of go back and forth with your coloring. Will it look overworked or something? Yeah, maybe. Alright, let me get into this little centers a little bit more too. They kind of look like those oxide-ish looking transitions like that. I mean, they look like alcohol, but you know, from what I've seen, those textures, you know, that would you get from things like oxide inks and whatnot. It's like I feel like I'm doing those things when I was a little kid. You know, you could get a bowl of water or something like that, and you get paint in a paintbrush, and you just touch it, and it does that little thing where it separates and moves out. Kind of brings back those types of memories of doing that type of thing. I don't know. We always used to be painting. We always had those peacock watercolor sets. That was the brand, I think. Now, see, that one is really kind of anemic. I'm starting kind of getting it down a little bit more. This one looks better right here. It starts to get a little bit better in terms of kind of the look I'm going. What I started doing was I started using more alcohol on here and really puddling it up like that. And I think that looks pretty interesting. Now let me see if I can find some areas up in here and then the clouds where I've applied it. Let's see. What's interesting is, see if I put it on the outside, it moves that little ring this way, you know, away from it. Just trying to kind of manipulate those areas a little bit. Now, if the whole thing was done with the alcohol inks, then I can kind of see where I'm going, but I can't tell where I've applied some of it in some areas, so I'm putting some of this alcohol down, and it's not doing anything. It's not doing that separation. I know I laid it down around here somewhere, so let's get some of that texture going down here. You can see where I've... Isn't that right there? That puddle right there. It looks underwater or something like that. It's kind of murky. Quite an experiment here. I feel like I'm like doing tie-dye or something. Again, I'm just kind of allowing these areas in here to kind of go back into solution. I was about to say melt, but it's almost like you're melting, you know, the chemically, the inks. I mean, it's just going back into solution, so it's not really melting them, but that's it. It has the feel of that too, something like that. All right, now those were isolated things, but I find that when I'm starting to bring it into these other areas and giving some of the areas a common texture with those other areas up there, it's starting to, as far as a theme, a textural theme, start to, I wouldn't say makes sense, but it's giving a little bit more continuity. So from a textural standpoint, it's just not quite so isolated and weird, although it is a little bit weird in general. Okay, so alcohol ink should dry fairly quickly, but I do have a pretty big puddle in some of these areas. You can really see that right in there. It takes on kind of a watercolory looking spirit, at least. A lousy colorist is what I would be if that was, you know, if that was watercolor. I'm not great at watercolors anyways, but it has that kind of feeling though, doesn't it? You know, when you do things like that. But let's get some extra textures in here. But speaking of the drying, I need this to dry a little bit before I do a little bit of splatter painting on here, getting some extra textures going in here. This is going to be like a texture monster of a piece here, I'm thinking. It's almost looking kind of more abstract too, to me, than anything. But we'll bring in some other images into here as well, so everything's kind of going wild right now, and we'll see where it can go when we get to the different imagery. Alright, so I think, well, this is drying and I'm thinking about, it is really setting up very quickly, unless it's just getting absorbed into the paper. Maybe I don't need to wait. I'm tempted to go back in and add some additional colors in there, and then to go back in and add some more, but I don't think I'm going to do that. The one thing that's occurring to me, though, is that we've lost a lot of our forms. Maybe what I need to do in the future is not to go so dark with it, and to, you know, just apply more of the alcohol inks as far as my coloring source and less of the dye. I'm just so used to doing what I did with the dye, I just wanted to keep going with it. But a little bit less of that type of ink. Alright, Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. We'll see where this goes. It could look horrible. Or it might not. We'll see where we'll see. It usually looks pretty good in terms of a textural surface that it creates. And, I mean, this scene, or this, I don't know, foundation, if you call it a scene, it's fairly dark now, so we don't have a lot of white of the page, if any. So this is a way to go back in and reintroduce that lightness back into the piece, okay? This is just on an old toothbrush, okay? And the bleed proof white is an opaque watercolor, all right? Let's see if I can get in here a little bit closer so you can see. I'm roughly going in this area right here. Some of it is going to go in my clouds, and I have no problem with that. It's just kind of a textural thing. I mean, it really is quite abstract right now, too, so... I'm not really worried about that, but see that kind of nice texture that's working up there? All right, now I have a little bit more on my brush here, so if I get some big blobs, then I'll just have to live with it. I can kind of rub them off, but all right. What is that? Textural monstrosity. Let's take a look at this right here. All right, my piece is really full and quite dark. I need to change the exposure of my camera right now. All right. That's about how it looks. When I'm starting off with a white piece of paper, I have to overcompensate with my exposure, so I increase the exposure by several clicks, but then, as my pieces get darker, it's still like overexposing. So this is about more, more lines with what it looks like. Okay. All right, now we have kind of some variations in splatter size, for lack of a better word. So let's go in and to kind of emphasize it. Now this to me is looking more along the spirit of like a children's book illustration or something like that. It's not supposed to be like a realistic depiction of sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some much larger stars here and there. Okay. And we'll utilize these a little bit later. This whole piece of paper now is fairly, it's kind of rippled with all that alkali that I laid down on it. It's pretty crazy. I almost feel like I don't know, I'm like working on can. I keep making these other references because it just doesn't feel like feel or look like any of the techniques that I'm usually doing. It's just different things happening on the paper in terms of those kind of melting of hue and the running of it. Alright, this is just white now, okay, but it's interesting though, that alcohol ink continued, as it dried, it continued to bleach out areas. I mean, it was really hard to see where I applied it, but when you let it set, then you have these like little globular puddles that resulted from that application of it. So what you get when you apply it is not necessarily what, or what you see when you apply it is not necessarily what you'll get in the final result. Interestingly enough, so anyways, this is going in to these areas. Everything's quite diffused and undefined in these areas right here. This is a way to go back in and add kind of a crisp element right back into those spaces, okay? So it doesn't just look like diffused, nothingness there. Okay, now we're working in blues and greens. So what you can do is you can go in with those same colors in your gel pen touches. Why not? You know, it's part of the color scheme, right? So why not add some of this? I have a pretty big space here to utilize this, so I won't be going too crazy with this. Well, actually, we have time lapse now with now that I'm editing my videos, so could, but I don't know if I want to. I don't want to add 10,000 little dots here. This is like a pastel green, blue-green. I don't know if it's teal, maybe a pale teal or something. Alright, and I do have pastel blue here, so let's use that. Sometimes if this is supposed to represent a star, you have to put it into an area where it's darker than this blue. This blue isn't light by any means, so I doubt if it'll even show up in this area. It's basically the same value as it. It's a little bit of a different hue color, so maybe it shows up a little bit, but looks like it's only going to show up in my darkest of areas, you know, mainly around the perimeter. Okay, now where to go from here? Let's try to bring in a little bit of additional texture, or a lot of texture. Let me see. Time for a new swab here. Okay, kind of fray these a little bit like so. Loosen them up, not really fray. Okay, the head is too tight. If you want a soft application of ink, then you have to do it with a soft applicator. So I kind of get this ball loosened up here. Okay, don't get it so loose where when you start using it, you're jamming the stick down on the paper. Okay, so you're kind of pulling this out this way a little bit, and then see, it's a little bit wider now. Okay, all right, let's see our white pigment ink, see if this can do anything positive. And I've retained some areas in here of my light, okay, but I've also drawn in a lot of little crisp little dots too, so maybe we can make these stars look like they're glowing. Kind of softens up that area in the center of these a little bit, or a lot. Okay, now that's what that looks like. let's apply this to some of the larger white gel pen dots that I've applied down here so they have that same kind of textural and lighting glow to them. I won't do all of them. Do some here and there. I find it's a little bit more effective if you don't have it on everything. If you apply too much, just kind of dab it and it'll come right off on your finger. It looks a little bit more celestial or something, doesn't it? By having that atmospheric glow out there. I'm going to even do some kind of out on the perimeters where that splatter painting kind of splash there. If you ever get, that splatter painting too with that Dr. Martens bleed proof white, if you don't like it, just rub it right off. It'll come right off. It just dries really instantly, so it's really a fantastic product. It's very forgiving. It's really fun to use, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do. And it's supposed to be very opaque, which it is. You just kind of have to add a little bit of water to it every time you use it, because it's a real kind of chalky consistency. So that's probably what it is, and it dries really fast in the bottle. So a little bit of water. All right. So let's take a look and see where we are here. Okay. So those little glowing little stars. Foreground imagery. Let me figure out what to do here. And I don't know what side's up and what side's down. Let's see. That looks pretty good to me. Yeah, maybe less so. What's standing, I think this to me looks kind of top and bottom to me. I don't know why. It's just, I don't know, visually weighted in a certain way, maybe. I'm not sure. There's not really a right or wrong or something like that. Oh, sorry. I just looked at my cotton balls here, one of my favorite little tools these days to work with. I'm applying some of that pigment ink on here, just for a little bit of a wider application. It's kind of dark down here, so I don't know how this will look, but we blot this off a little bit. I don't want to apply it in blobs of ink, so I'm going to get it to the right consistency. I'm going to take, in other words, I'm going to take off enough ink. Maybe I took off too much. It's like I'm dabbing it off and it's coming off in globs, and then suddenly there's nothing on there. Okay, let me see it here again. Alright. You want to do a dry application of this too. So, like on these clads that are a little bit lighter, I'll just apply some of this over the top of them, just to get a little tinge of a kind of a different texture and light there. Alright, let's see here. Alright, here too. This one's a little bit lighter. And I'm going for a lot of different textural applications in this scene. I might as well just go for it all. So here it is right down here. I like that. See that down there? That's not like that, but it's a little bit different. Okay. Yeah, that was pretty good. See that little haze around there? Let's apply some of this down here too. It got lighter down here. Let's apply a little bit of a atmosphere to it. Hey, actually, that looks really good. The cotton ball technique. Some of the best tools are right in our own home. Look at that kind of glowing texture right there, huh? There are some areas when I'm applying this ink with this cotton ball that I wouldn't normally do using it like a cotton swab in a smaller area, but it seems to go in with a different texture with this, which shouldn't come as a surprise to me, but I don't know, it kind of harmonizes in. Maybe it's because it's just covering a much kind of wider area, where I can use it in areas that, like I said, I wouldn't have used otherwise. Or before. Putting some of it over that alcohol ink blend just to, I don't know, vary it a little bit. From a textural standpoint. So maybe that adds to kind of a textural richness right there. See, I put a little bit right here. So it just changes it from, you know, around there a little bit. Kind of oscillating textures from something fairly crisp to something a little bit more diffused and soft and undefined. Okay. All right. It's funny as I'm doing this, even though I'm talking through these videos. As I'm doing, you know, some of those applications, if I get real quiet, I think I'm holding my breath or something like that. Kind of in anticipation or whatnot. Or curiosity, maybe. All right, let's take a look at some other imagery in here now. I plan on having kind of a perimeter of images in here, and I've been using a lot of like the pine trees before, kind of going back into perspective, but I thought I would do much more of a, I don't know, kind of a more of an amorphic I don't know if that's the word, kind of an undefined grouping of foliage. Okay, so it's just like you're looking up there, but you know, one way could be up and one way could be down or whatever. You know, so nothing so set. Okay, but I'm trying to think if I will use kind of a little bit of perspective in here. Maybe a touch, but not so much, so, okay. Alright, this is the hanging branch large stamp that I'll be using in here. Alright. And I'm going to be applying this in VersaFine. I think I need an ink that is going to have the best chance of standing up against all that texture in there. Some of that texture, like especially the Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White, those little specks of white end up showing through my imagery that I stamp over the top of, but that's not really going to pose a problem, I don't think. Yeah, it never does. There's little tiny dots, so no big deal. Okay, just I probably don't need to spend so much time, but I'm stamping this over the top of alcohol inks, and sometimes the dye and alcohol don't mix, right? So I'm staying a little bit longer. Yeah, it's a little bit lighter in some areas, but still a pretty good impression, okay? We'll be layering in several different images into the piece, so we got a long ways to go. Okay. Okay, like that. I have other leaves that I'll be using in here as well. Okay, let's see what's going on here a little bit. Alright, let's see. Let's move on to a different image. This is the leaves stamp. Okay. I'm kind of building it up. I'm kind of determining if I want some area a little bit more dense, you know. But I just do it kind of incrementally, or I don't know, one at a one impression at a time, just to get a feel of how it's going to look. You can always add more, but you can't necessarily take off an image that you've already applied. So, you know, just kind of do it, make an assessment. I'm trying to think if I want anything else in here in terms of a different type of piece of foliage. I do have these hanging ones too that would look pretty good. Or do I want to go with another branch, kind of moving upward? I kind of like that hanging type of theme here, though. Let's go with one more here. Or, well, let's go with the smaller one. Let's try that one. We'll use scale a little bit. Okay. This will be a kind of a reiteration of form in a different size to the larger one. Yeah, actually looks great. Okay, I'll use that in a couple different areas. It just looks like it's, I don't know, it could be a different size, but it can also represent that something that's a little bit farther back. This little figure might be kind of interesting right there. I'm thinking about some birds or something up here, though. I'll try to determine that, but anyway, that is the perimeter. It's kind of like a framing device, right? That placed about like so. And yeah, let's try to figure out something to put in here. I could go bold with some figure down here. It's like they're looking back into the night sky. But I'm not sure. Okay, let me go take a look at some different images and make a determination. A wolf. All right, choices. Okay, I've decided to go bold. It'd be easy for me to put some birds up there, and I think they would look good, but I've been doing a lot of that, especially with my eagles. I love them. But let's go with something like this. I'm going to have this. I'm going to set this down into kind of a, I don't know, kind of anchored in terms of kind of the main subject matter with this bird. And which one is this one? I think this one's called Heron. But I like it right here in this corner area. And it's a bold silhouette, so it'll definitely fit into the spirit of this entire perimeter of foliage, branches and whatnot. Okay. Stamping it again and versifying. Okay. And now, see the movement's going that way, so I'll counter it up here with these birds up here going this way. Maybe I'll put them lower. Yeah, I think right there, actually. That's what they look like that. Okay. That is that. Something just arrived at my front door. Let me go check it out. There might be some rubber. Yep, that's what it was. My shipment of rubber. And stamp sets. But anyways, going back to this. A lot of crisp imagery in here. And very wet. Versified pigment ink on here right now. But anyways, just a ton of texture in this piece. And a real experiment in terms of formations back there. I'm curious to see what this piece would look like when sprayed with a spray sealant. A lot of it got kind of anemic with the use of the alcohol. It really dulled it down out there. I'm tempted. Maybe I will do this. I think I'm going to go out and spray this right now. And I don't think it'll make the pigment ink run because the pigment ink is water-based, so I think I should be okay, but I should be able to bring back a little bit of the vibrancy of the inks that have been laid down there, but we'll see. Okay, so give me a minute and I will go out and spray it. I'm not going to film that portion of it, so just do a quick spray and okay, kind of interesting. It did bring back some of the vibrancy of the, or intensity of the inks, but in some places where it looked real matte and kind of diffused with that alcohol, I don't know. I kind of missed that on this piece right here, so I'm not really quite sure if that was the way to go. But we did, I don't know, determine some different things with it. But I did lose a lot of my pigment ink to touches, which I could go back over it with, you know, with that cotton ball, and apply a little bit more on here. And I think I will do that, but I can't do it right now because this VersaFine Black is just so wet right now, even after spray sealing it. Spray sealing it only puts a coat down there, but it doesn't dry the ink out, so that will have to be dried. Oh, I don't know. I usually give it a couple days, in fact. I don't know, it's probably drying it one day, but anytime I've gone back in and tested it out, after a couple days it's completely dry, so I'll probably do something like that. But I think some more touches with the gel pen might look kind of interesting in here, now that kind of we've resurrected a lot of the intensity in a lot of the area. Now some areas have to be kind of adjusted for that, especially where I've lost some of that kind of pigment ink, white pigment ink, kind of cloudy, foggish looking sections as far as that texture goes. I kind of had to apply a little bit more of the spray sealant too, so I lost a lot of it, but I found that it took a couple coats in order for it to penetrate that alcohol area where it dried, and to kind of reveal the deeper, kind of richer saturations with the other inks, the alcohol inks and the dye-based inks underneath. So I don't know, kind of interesting. Now see, these little forms in here are a little bit too harsh. Well, okay, let me try to go back in there. I guess those areas are far enough away from my VersaFine where there won't be any danger of kind of smearing those images out. Okay. And that happens when you spray seal. You do lose, you know, this is like, it's like applying spray sealant or something like that to pastels. When you do it on to thin layers of pigment ink, it does affect the appearance of that application. It just kind of disappears a little bit. It goes from something that's a lot more translucent, and it turns it into a bit of a transparent, as far as the pigment ink goes, okay? Not the dye-based inks or anything like that, or the alcohol inks, just the pigment inks. Yeah, see that right there? It needs a little bit of that, kind of that softer diffusion in there to incorporate the alcohol texturing that's occurred. Okay, so yeah. I need to be careful about those birds right there. Okay, now I'm getting back what I liked in the first place, but I have the benefit of it contrasting against kind of some brighter, deeper saturations of color too, so it looks a little bit more full and maybe balanced, I guess. Certainly incorporated. All right. Kind of applying some of that atmospheric haze into the piece. Otherwise, that texture kind of stood out a little bit too much. I don't want to bury it. I just want it a little bit more incorporated into the piece as a whole. Okay, all right, so a masterpiece, no, but I learned something along the way in terms of, you know, that alcohol ink kind of being spread around. It would be interesting if I did it more, like if it was really wide, like out here. I think that would be maybe even more effective in terms of the usage of that type of texture rather than it being kind of isolated in that little area. Or just having more of it out around here, otherwise it kind of stands out. But I don't know, I find it kind of interesting and definitely fun to play around in, you know, having kind of those inks kind of spread out like that. So fun stuff. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the experiment here. Hope you liked the end result of the scene and whatnot. I've lost a little bit of my star clusters and structure back there, but that set a foundation for kind of my lighting scheme back within that area. And you can see the imagery, but it's really quite buried in all the tone and textures and media that's been applied on top of it. But you get the gist of it here, and it's really kind of evolved over the course of this one scene. So just a ton of textures, maybe the most textured piece I've ever done. And as far as the different looks within those textures that are, I don't know, kind of semi-incorporated, but not completely. So I don't know, a lot more work to do on that type of texturing, but I think it's worth a go. I want to do something like a sun in a sky with like these emanating rays or these bands of things, and I think that's where these kind of would come into play in yellows and oranges, like these bands. Can you imagine that? And another band out here and another band out here, kind of emanating from yellow, orange, red or something like that, or purples or magentas. I think that would look kind of interesting and a little bit more, I don't know, it's not really abstract, but definitely kind of more of an expressionist type of take. Not so much so, but a little bit more, you know, in terms of an expressionistic style of I don't know, application of media to convey a certain kind of emotion or whatnot. And that's what I'm always kind of looking for in my experiments, and to see what we can come up with. So anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks as always for tuning into the channel.